What's up, everyone? I was out at the farm the other day and looking through some of these pines that I put over rock and into auxiliary containers to make exposed root, and I decided to just grab a 6-pack of them and see what comes up as I reveal some of the roots. I made enough of these when I was working on them last winter that I don't actually remember what most of them look like. So it's actually a little bit like Christmas, opening a present here, and finding something that you really kind of surprises you. I mean, just based on the fact that the tree, in this case, is coming out of the side, I would expect that this might have been an attempt at an upside down exposed root. So let's take a look. And in case you're wondering why I have saran wrap around here, actually pallet wrap, around the mesh, it's because sometimes I find that when I've just put these guys in here that they dry out too quickly with just the mesh, and it depends on how tall, how big around and whatnot, but I was having some issues with them last spring with trees dying because they were drying out because all the roots are up here in the mesh. And so to make it a little bit easier for them to get their roots down into the bottoms of these containers, I decided to wrap some of them with that pallet wrap as well. So I'm going to gently remove the tie wires that are holding this together with the bottom container, and then try to kind of peel apart, at least starting at the top, maybe not the whole thing, this auxiliary container, and let some of the soil kind of drop down. All right, so I've got the mesh off, and I've combed out some of the soil here, but left some of it intact as well. And I think what I want to do with this tree is really to kind of take these roots, and I don't want to stretch them out and just let them be like this. I actually want to give them some more shape. But the thing I'm seeing right off the bat that I don't like is that this section right here is just too straight. So I'm going to thin out these buds, and I'm going to get a big piece of wire, and I'm going to wrap it around here first, and then I'm going to go out here so that I can bend this section so that I don't have a straight section sticking out of the side of my composition or wherever it ends up being. So there's a lot of buds right here in one location, so I'm just going to thin some of these buds. Now I don't want to thin too many because ultimately pretty much the rest of the tree is just a sacrifice branch that I'm going to be using to create more wood and density in here. So everything that I plan to keep is actually right here, these branches, but still I don't want too many branches. So I'm going to thin them out a little bit, which will make it easier to wire. And then I'll go ahead and throw the wire on there. So I've got 1, 2, 3, about 5 buds left and enough space to throw that wire on here. And the other thing is that, this will allow me to stabilize the sacrifice branch. I doubt that I'm going to use anything beyond here, but it is possible if it pops a bud in here that I might end up using that. All right, 2 pieces of 3mm aluminum didn't get the job done in terms of bending this, so I added a big piece of copper, which should allow me to bend this. Now, because I won't get buds in here or down, obviously, on the roots, I'm going to bend this so that I have foliage closer in down to the interesting part of the composition. And then I'm going to protect the roots a little bit and be done with it for now, set it outside back in the field to grow for another year, most likely. Much better. All I'm really trying to do here is just keep this from completely drying out or getting scorched in the sun now that it's a little bit more exposed. So a little bit of sphagnum moss on the surface will do that, and then I'm going to wrap it in plastic again. If I can get the plastic in there. It's the thing about having trees being all twisty and then trying to wrap them in anything is like, well, how are you gonna get the wrap in there? So, not pretty, but that's what's going to get it done. And the foliage coming from down here is going to make for an interesting ability to create a compact composition if that's what I decide to do. So I've got 2 nice branches coming out from about the same spot. I've also kind of secured this using these wires to make sure that it doesn't flop around too much or uproot itself. So that's it for tree number 1. This tree is somewhat similar to the other one, except for some reason I put a bunch of wire on here. I'm not really sure why, and it appears that I kind of forgot it was on here. So some of this has cut in. I'm not sure that it'll really matter in the sense that it's not likely that anything past this junction I would end up using, and there's no substantial wire cutting up to that point. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this first. Lots of roots on the bottom, which means that the tree has grown really healthy since the last time I repotted it. It's a good sign that there'll be nice big roots in here, but rather than taking off the whole thing like I did on the last one, I'm going to start just by cutting away the top couple of inches. So in order to do that, I still need to take off these ties. Now this one wasn't wrapped in plastic, which makes me think that there's going to be fewer fine roots in here than there were on the other one, but we'll see. Not a bad amount of fine roots up here. Kind of interesting to see that. Um, so I've just kind of picked away some of the soil, and all of these little teeny roots are not really what we're after. We're really after these bigger guys. But they're not so big yet that I'm going to do anything to them. So I think for now, I'm just going to leave it at that for this one. I'm going to reattach these wires to keep it firmly attached to the lower container and revisit it in a little while. So one thing I want to make sure doesn't happen is I don't want the roots going down and then sideways through this mesh, because that means I'll have to cut them. So I'm just removing enough soil here to find the base of that mesh to ensure that it doesn't remain wet enough to encourage the roots to stay in that kind of an area and branch away. There's already a few of them down here, but I'm really, just a couple is no big deal. It's just if this continues to get larger in terms of the root size, I don't want to have to deal with cutting them out from in between the holes of this. Now, whenever I look at a tree like this, I want to not only sort of expose some of the roots and make a little bit of progress there, but just ensure that, there's good options for creating a tree. And one of the things I'm seeing with this one specifically is that there's a lot of nice little buds in here, which would make for a nice top. And these guys can help with the taper, but are not going to be super useful for actually creating the finished product or the finished tree. So let's see what else. There's a bud here, but that's at a big junction. There's a couple of other buds back here. And then this branch actually could be really useful as if the tree stays tall, as a kind of cascading branch on a cascade or semi-cascade type tree. That's it for this one. Let's take a look at number 3. All right, number 3, and this one is a root over rock. So I'm going to, I think, expose most of the rock. It looks like you can kind of see that the roots are starting to hug it. There's a piece of wire in here that might be a problem. And I can kind of come in here and I think remove this entire container and let the soil fall down. This container is actually going about more than halfway down into the basket below it, which means that if I remove it, the basket will fill up, and then I should have the rock maybe already at the right height if I was being smart when I put it in here. I don't know if you notice, but the color of the tree doesn't look nearly as good as the other two that I just worked on. So I'm kind of wondering, the buds look relatively good size. There's some good sized buds up there, but I'm sort of wondering what's going on with this tree in terms of health, that the color is not looking as good, and the roots are not the roots, the needles are also a little bit shorter than I would expect. Still, it has a lot of decent growth, so all right, well, this is kind of problematic. I need to take these roots, remove some of the soil that's in between them and the rock, and kind of squeeze the larger ones down against the rock. Either that or this needs to be removed, but I don't think I want to remove it. So in order to be able to do that, I need to take this out of this container. So I'm going to go ahead and scrape off these little bits of roots that are down here, and then just pop the whole thing out, and hopefully the root ball will hold together. The roots that are underneath the bottom of the container here are already kind of dried out. They're not dead, but they're not actively growing. So I'm not really cutting off anything that is going to affect the growth of the tree. And it being mid-September, we're into our fall repotting window here in the Bay Area. It's a little bit different for everyone in terms of timing, but I see a lot of good root growth in the trees this time of year, and as long as they have a few weeks after having a little bit of root work in the fall, they will recover nicely. All right, with the top half of the root ball, I have gone ahead and scraped out all of the soil, and you can kind of see in here the remnants of the raffia that I used to bind the roots to the rock the first time. But a lot of these roots kind of came out at the surface and went down outside of that raffia. So what I want to do now is I want to just get in here and kind of take those roots and squish them against the rock while they're still flexible, so I get a really good grip on the rock over the next year or two before I start moving into the refinement stage when the tree won't be making nearly as much wood. And removing a, so, you know, obviously I'm disturbing some of the root tips here at the top. I'm not as concerned about those as the ones that are down lower. Actually sort of want the root tips that are up here to die, and that will sort of encourage the tree to rely more on the root tips that are down below the rock. One thing I do need to do is just sort of reorient and make sure that I find the bottom of the stone. When you get to the tail end of this process, if you've got too much stone underneath your soil, then you're not going to be able to fit it into a smaller bonsai container. It's going to have to end up in a deeper container. So I don't have to get all the way down right now, but I need to, you know, at least expose some of the root and make sure. So there's a bottom facet of the rock right here, so I'm going to stop there. All right, so I've got the roots tied up with raffia rope, and I'm going to step this up into this larger pond basket. I've got a couple inches of soil underneath it, and now I'm just going to fill most of the way up on the sides. All right, that's it for that one. The bigger container will have it growing a lot more vigorously next year, and I think that the soil was a little bit too lean on coconut, so I've added some fresh soil to it. That will also help, and also just got to keep my eye out for pesky little root aphids. So. All right, for the other two that were in this 6-pack, they're actually not exposed root or root over rock. These are just sort of normal, informal upright or something else like that. So I haven't really done anything. I took some wire off of this, and then on this one, I actually added some wire to bend over this sacrifice branch. If you haven't seen one of the old videos where I call this a key step that you don't want to miss, you can look back through our early development playlist. And basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make it so that my cut point is not perfectly flat. So if I decide to cut it here, that I have a little bit of wiggle room and I can use this as part of the top. Also cut back these side branches a little bit. It's not necessarily the right time of year to do that, so I don't know exactly what it's going to do in reaction to that, but it's going to be better than me just leaving them and not addressing the whole thing until sometime next year. If you have comments and questions about these early development steps, leave them in the comments below. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.